The Watcher's Shadow, a Legacy of Fear. Chapter 1. The Quiet Town. Harrison, Indiana, was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors at night. Nestled between endless fields of corn and soybean, the town had a population just shy of 10,000. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. On a crisp October morning in 1994, the illusion of safety shattered. Carol Thompson, a retired schoolteacher, went for her usual jog around the lake. She never came back. Her body was discovered by a local fisherman, floating lifelessly in the water. What initially seemed like an accident quickly turned into something far darker. Detective Frank Delaney, a recent transplant from Chicago, was assigned the case. To the locals, he was an outsider, a big city cop with no understanding of small-town life. But Frank carried a secret of his own, one that would soon intertwine with the dark underbelly of Harrison. Chapter 2. A Killer Among Us. The autopsy report was clear. Carol had been strangled. The crime scene offered little in the way of evidence. No footprints, no weapon, no sign of struggle. The only clue was a faint smear of motor oil on her jogging clothes. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some blamed a drifter seen passing through town days before. Others whispered about Carol's ex-husband, a man with a short temper and a long history of disputes. Frank, however, wasn't convinced by the town's gossip. He believed the killer was someone local, someone who knew the area well. As Frank delved deeper, he uncovered secrets about Carol's life that shocked the community. Beneath her kindly exterior was a woman embroiled in financial troubles and an affair with a married man. But was any of it motive for murder? Chapter 3. The second victim. Just as the town began to settle back into uneasy routine, tragedy struck again. This time, the victim was 19-year-old Jake Lawson, a star athlete at Harrison High. Jake was found in his pickup truck, parked in an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. His throat had been slit, and a crude symbol was carved into the dashboard. The town descended into panic. Parents kept their children indoors, businesses closed early, and the local hardware store sold out of deadbolts and security cameras. Frank's investigation intensified. The connection between Carol and Jake was tenuous at best, but one detail stood out. The same motor oil residue found on Carol's clothing was also present in Jake's truck. Chapter 4. The Stranger. As the weeks dragged on with no arrest, a stranger arrived in Harrison. Jacob "Jake" Hawthorne, a journalist from Indianapolis, claimed he was writing a story about small-town crime. Frank was immediately suspicious. Why would a big-city reporter care about Harrison? Hawthorne wasn't forthcoming about his reasons, but his probing questions and relentless pursuit of local secrets put everyone on edge. He struck up an unlikely alliance with Frank, offering insights that seemed almost too perceptive. Was he an ally? Or did he have his own agenda? Chapter 5. Buried Secrets. Digging through old police records, Frank discovered a chilling pattern. In the late 1970s, 3 unsolved murders occurred in nearby towns. The victims shared similarities with Carol and Jake: strangulation, slashed throats, and traces of motor oil. Frank's discovery led him to an abandoned factory on the edge of town. Once the heart of Harrison's economy, it had been shuttered for decades. Inside, he found evidence that linked the factory to the murders: photographs, personal belongings of the victims, and a map with red X's marking the locations of the killings. But who was behind it? Chapter 6. A Family Affair. The investigation took a shocking turn when Frank uncovered a connection between the factory and the town's most prominent family, the Langstons. William Langston, the patriarch, had owned the factory until its closure. His son Robert had a history of violence and a penchant for disappearing for weeks at a time. Confronting the Langstons was risky. They wielded considerable influence in Harrison, and Frank knew that accusing them without concrete evidence could end his career or worse. But when he found a bloody shirt belonging to Robert hidden in the Langston estate, Frank knew he was onto something. Chapter 7. The Trap. With Hawthorne's help, Frank devised a plan to lure the killer out. They staged a press conference announcing a breakthrough in the case and claiming to have a suspect in custody. The hope was that the real killer would panic and make a mistake. The plan worked, but not in the way they expected. That night, Hawthorne was attacked in his motel room. He survived, but the incident raised more questions than answers. Why had the killer targeted him, and why did Hawthorne seem almost prepared for it? Chapter 8. Revelations. Hawthorne's past came to light. He wasn't just a journalist, he was the brother of one of the 1970s victims. His story was a ruse to find his sister's killer. Frank felt betrayed, but understood Hawthorne's motives. Together, they pieced together the puzzle, discovering that Robert Langston had been working with an accomplice, someone even closer to home. Chapter 9. A deadly message. Just when Frank thought he had the pieces of the puzzle, another murder sent shockwaves through Harrison. This time, the victim was Amanda Carter, a local teacher. Her body was found in the town square with a chilling message carved into her arm. The clock is ticking. The method was different, but the message suggested a connection to the earlier murders. Panic returned to the town, and Frank found himself racing against time to prevent further bloodshed. Chapter 10. The Underground Society. Further investigation led Frank and Hawthorne to uncover whispers of an underground society operating in the Midwest. Known as the Watchers, this shadowy group had its hand in several unsolved murders across the region. Their goal? To instill fear and maintain control over small-town America through calculated violence. Frank learned that some of Harrison's most respected citizens might be tied to the Watchers, including local officials who had obstructed previous investigations. Chapter B. 11. The Ritual Chamber. Frank followed a lead to the woods outside town, uncovering an abandoned cabin filled with symbols and photographs. The images depicted past victims, all posed as if part of some twisted ritual. Hawthorne uncovered journals that detailed the Watchers' long-standing control over the town. Chapter 12. The Festival of Fear. On the night of the festival, chaos erupted. As fireworks lit the sky, Frank discovered that explosives had been planted in the town square. Racing against time, he defused the bombs, but the panic spread. In the confusion, Frank spotted Sheriff Willis fleeing toward the old Langston factory. Chapter 13. The Showdown. In a climactic confrontation at the Langston factory, Frank cornered Willis and Robert Langston. Willis revealed the truth about the renewal, a ritualistic killing meant to cleanse the town of its sins. The confrontation ended in a fiery explosion, taking Langston's life and severely injuring Willis, who was arrested. Chapter 14. The aftermath, with Willis behind bars and the Langston estate seized, Harrison began to heal, but the scars ran deep. Frank, hailed as a hero, couldn't shake the feeling that the Watchers' network was larger than anyone suspected. Chapter 15. The Farmhouse. Months later, Frank received an unmarked letter. Inside was a photograph of a farmhouse in Ohio, with the message, "It's not over." Determined to end the Watchers once and for all, Frank set out on a new journey. Chapter 16. The Engineer's Return. Frank tracked the engineer to a private island where the final showdown took place. In a tense confrontation, Frank managed to capture the leader, dismantling the Watchers' leadership. Yet the victory felt hollow as he realized the group's ideology had already spread too far. Chapter 17. The Network Unveiled. Frank's investigation revealed that the Watchers' influence extended far beyond Harrison. The group had chapters in several states, all operating independently but sharing the same dark purpose. The fight wasn't just about one town, it was about dismantling a nationwide conspiracy. Chapter 18. Hawthorne's Sacrifice. Hawthorne, in his relentless pursuit of truth, uncovered a major lead that brought him face to face with one of the Watchers' key operatives. The encounter turned deadly, and Hawthorne sacrificed himself to ensure the evidence reached Frank. His death galvanized Frank to continue the fight, no matter the cost. Chapter 19. The Final Ambush. Frank's pursuit of the Watchers' last stronghold led him to a secluded compound in the Appalachian Mountains. With federal agents at his side, Frank launched a daring raid. The operation was bloody, with losses on both sides, but it dismantled the Watchers' leadership once and for all. Chapter 20. A Light in the Shadows. With the Watchers' network shattered, Harrison finally found peace. Frank chose to stay in the town, mentoring young officers and helping rebuild the community. One day, he received a package containing a simple note: "The shadows never truly vanish." As he stared at the sunset, Frank resolved to remain vigilant, knowing that while the Watchers had been defeated, the fight against darkness was eternal. Chapter 21. The Forgotten Files. Frank discovered a set of old police files buried deep in the archives, detailing crimes that predated the Watchers' network. The patterns were eerily similar, suggesting the group had evolved from an older organization. Among the files, he found a chilling photograph, a group of masked figures standing before the Langston factory in the 1930s. This discovery confirmed his fears. The Watchers were part of a legacy that spanned generations. Chapter 22. The Silent Witness. A breakthrough came when Frank was approached by an elderly woman named Martha, who had lived in Harrison her entire life. Martha revealed that her late husband had been part of a group investigating the Langston family decades earlier, but disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She provided Frank with a hidden journal that contained cryptic entries detailing rituals held in secret locations around town. The journal mentioned the Vault, a place rumored to hold the Watchers' most guarded secrets. Chapter 23. The Vault. Using clues from the journal, Frank and a small team unearthed an underground vault beneath the ruins of the Langston factory. Inside, they found ledgers, photographs, and recordings documenting decades of crimes orchestrated by the Watchers. The most shocking discovery was a list of prominent figures, judges, politicians, and business leaders, who had either supported or turned a blind eye to the Watchers' activities. Frank realized the scope of the conspiracy was far greater than he imagined. The Watchers weren't just a local threat, they had influence across the country. Chapter 24. The Conspiracy Unfolds. As Frank delved deeper into the contents of the vault, he uncovered correspondence between the Watchers and a secretive organization known as the Circle. This group operated on an international level, using fear and manipulation to control communities and maintain power. The letters hinted at an upcoming event called the Purge, a coordinated effort to eliminate whistleblowers and dissidents. Frank knew time was running out. The Watchers' remnants were preparing to strike, and the Circle was backing them with resources and protection. Chapter 25. The Final Countdown. Frank orchestrated a massive operation involving the FBI, state police, and trusted local officers to intercept the Watchers before they could execute the purge. The operation led them to an abandoned estate outside of Harrison, where the remaining Watchers had gathered for a final stand. In a tense and explosive confrontation, Frank's team managed to apprehend key leaders of the Watchers, but not without casualties. Evidence recovered from the estate linked the Circle to a series of accidents and disappearances across the nation, further exposing their reach. Chapter 26. The Circle's Shadow. Though the Watchers were dismantled, Frank couldn't ignore the looming threat of the Circle. A cryptic message left behind by one of the captured Watchers warned, "Cut one branch, and the roots will grow another." Frank knew his battle was far from over. Hawthorne's expose on the Watchers went viral, drawing national attention to Harrison and its dark history. However, it also made Frank and his allies targets. Frank received anonymous threats, and his every move was shadowed by unknown figures. Chapter 27. The Legacy. As Harrison began to rebuild, Frank took it upon himself to ensure the town's history would never be forgotten. He established a community center dedicated to the victims of the Watchers and worked tirelessly to expose corruption at every level. The Langston estate, once a symbol of fear, became a place of hope and healing. Despite the progress, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that the Circle was watching, waiting for the right moment to return. He prepared for what he knew would be an inevitable confrontation, determined to protect his town at all costs. Chapter 28. The Unfinished Fight. One quiet evening, Frank received a package with no return address. Inside was a single haunting item, a map marked with red X's, locations of new renewals planned across the country. Attached was a note that read, "It begins again." Frank stared at the map, his resolve hardening. He knew his fight was far from over. The Watchers were gone, but the Circle remained, their influence growing like a cancer. As he prepared to leave Harrison to confront the next battle, he looked out at the town he had fought so hard to save, vowing to return when the fight was finally over.